And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could I take my baby with me into this dive bar if I pretend she's my emotional support animal? And with Britney Spears still seething over her conservatorship, are we in for at least one more year of pop star rage tweeting? And now, the podcast host who would never let a clogged shower drain prevent him from bathing at ungodly hours, Pete Dominic.
Oh, yes, he is so good at taking the little nuggets I drop on social media or the show and working them into the opening. Pete Co, ladies and gentlemen, always so good. Yeah, I walked downstairs today and I saw the downstairs shower. You know, we got a raised ranch, so it's like below the ground, plumbing and gravity and pipes and I don't know, but the drain was upchucking, like a bunch of sediment in there and water, like 2 inches of water. I brought in got like a 5 horsepower water pump. I used to take the water off the pool cover, brought that in there and sucked it out, and it kept sucking more water up, kept filling up. Insane. Then that drained out. So I brought the garden hose in and shot that shit full blast down the drain of the shower, and that seemed to work for a minute. And I was like, maybe I think I cleared it out. Put some Drano in it. I'd already done that first. I snaked it too. I have a snake, a plumbing snake. Did that too. I think I fixed it, and I come down there a couple hours later, and it upchucked again. There's just mud all over the shower. So I'm not screwing around. I called the plumber. I was like, I tried everything. Calling the plumber because Val gets back from Italy on Saturday, and that would be a bad thing. So I'm getting that taken care of. Don't try to help me. I'm hiring an expert. Speaking of experts, I have an excellent guest joining me. 2 great guests, but the expert on terrorism, domestic terrorism, drones. He wrote a book about drones. He is a professor. Nicholas Grossman joins me for the first time. He's written a very interesting article, several articles, but he's got an article about Tucker Carlson aiding terrorists, and it's fascinating and important. This guy is great. And then before that, I've got another inspiring and healing and funny conversation with George Carlin's daughter, Kelly Carlin, who's a really good friend of mine, a mentor, an amazing woman. And so Kelly Carlin, Professor Nicholas Grossman, both join me today. But it is Thursday. I do the news Monday through Thursday. I have news segments on Thursday nights. I have hangouts, so I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout at 8 East if you are a stand-up member. If not, what are you waiting for? StandUpWithPete.com. Lots of new listeners that aren't paying. Come on, go sign up for $5 right now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes or StandUpWithPete.com. But let's get to it right now. It's time for the last 24 hours in news. All right, let's start in Texas, where we've got 2 major stories coming out of. A federal judge Wednesday temporarily has blocked the near total ban on abortion in Texas, which, of course, is the most reprehensible, archaic law in the United States, in a challenge brought by President Joe Biden's administration after the U.S. Supreme Court had allowed it to go into effect. The action by U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman in Austin prevented the state from enforcing the Republican-backed law, which prohibits women from obtaining an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, while litigation over its legality continues. So a lot to discuss about that story in the coming days. I'm sure you're going to hear and read about it, but that's relief and good news for, well, it's temporary for sure. And the other story out of Texas is a school shooting. A suspect who fled after opening fire inside a Fort Worth area high school sent students and staff running for their lives was taken into custody Wednesday after an hours-long manhunt, authorities are saying. The shooting left at least 4 people injured, and the family of a Texas school shooting suspect says he was bullied and robbed at the high school. So a lot more, I'm sure, that we'll hear about that story. Yet another school shooting in Texas. And I also saw this news that one of those giant petroleum drums, those huge, football field size refineries in Texas City is leaking, and there's video of it. You can see this hole at the bottom of it just crude oil pouring out of this refinery, Marathon Petroleum Refinery in Texas City. Texas had a shitty day yesterday. I actually wrote about those things on Twitter and said something like that, and someone replied, "Day? Yeah, I get it. Fair enough." Well, that's all bad news coming out of Texas, but we did have, just such consequential good news, really major, very important, excellent news. This is something I think about quite a bit because of my relationship with economist Jeffrey Sachs, who's done amazing work on this, as well as the great organization GiveWell that has also done a lot of work on this. Malaria. Malaria kills about 500,000 people each year. About half of them are children in Africa. And for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, a vaccine is shown to prevent the disease, and it's been approved by the WHO. This news could not be better. This is a historical event, and I'm so very excited about it. Here is the announcement from the WHO Director General, whose name I'm not even going to try to say.
As some of you may know, I started my career as a malaria researcher, and I longed for the day that we would have an effective vaccine against this ancient and terrible disease. And today is that day, an historic day. Today, WHO is recommending the broad use of the world's first malaria vaccine. This recommendation is based on results from an ongoing pilot program in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi that has reached more than 800,000 children since 2019. This long-awaited malaria vaccine is a breakthrough for science, child health, and malaria control. Using this vaccine in addition to existing tools to prevent malaria could save tens of thousands of young lives each year.
In response, comedian podcaster Joe Rogan said he still prefers natural immunity, Black Rifle coffee, and the blood of the baby Jesus to protect from mosquito bites. I'm kidding. I kid, my friend Joe Rogan. I don't know that he's weighed in on it yet. I hope he does. I hope he talks about it and lets everybody know about this miracle drug. It's great, great news. The world's first ever malaria vaccine. Major. All right, I got a few things to play for you regarding the ridiculous controversy over the debt limit, as well as the negotiations, less ridiculous but important, still ridiculous, negotiations over in Congress on the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill. Let's start with, I think this is great. This clip from Bernie Sanders talking about Joe Manchin. I just love all 2 minutes of this. I've been playing a lot of Bernie lately. I think this is good. Here we go.
I'm not here to disparage Senator Manchin, and I respect him for his you're right. We differ. What I would say is this, and I know a lot of the media talks about, compromise and all that stuff. We got 48 senators who support $3.5 trillion. We got 2 who do not. Now, to be very honest with you, as I think all of you know, I believe that our current healthcare system is totally dysfunctional. And I strongly, strongly believe in a Medicare for All single-payer program. I could, in 5 minutes, go to Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, and say, Chuck, I can't support this bill unless you have a Medicare for All provision in there. But I'm not going to do that because I know, I don't know how many, maybe half the members of the caucus, a third of the members of the caucus support that. It would be irresponsible. So my concern with Mr. Manchin is not so much what his views are. I disagree with him. But it is that it is wrong. It is really not playing fair that 1 or 2 people think that they should be able to stop what 48 members of the Democratic caucus want, what the American people want, what the President of the United States wants. That would be my position. So Senator Manchin has a right to fight for his point of view. He has not only a right to be heard, he has a right to get some compromises. He's a member of the Senate. But 2 people do not have the right to sabotage what 48 want and what the President of the United States want. That, to me, is wrong. Yes, ma'am.
Well explained, Senator Sanders. And yesterday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki didn't mince her words when she was asked by NBC why President Biden hasn't called Mitch McConnell. Let's listen to that.
Why wouldn't the president, given that relationship he has with Mitch McConnell, just call Mitch McConnell and have this conversation with him? Why do this through public
What's the
events.
conversation about?
I don't know. They have the relationship. He's the one who said he could bring the two sides together. So wouldn't there be some value in having that conversation?
We know what the risk-free option is here. We know what the clear path forward is here. And I think the president has made no secret about his belief on that.
There's another big, ridiculous, stupid, manufactured question controversy that popped up yesterday. And this is about the National Organization of School Boards. It's an organization that represents the interests of volunteers working on school boards. It helps school boards do their work. It's an organization. It's a nonprofit. Okay. And so they are very concerned and wrote a letter to the president saying that there are all kinds of threats being made against board members. And they pressed President Joe Biden for federal assistance to review whether violence and threats against public school officials could be considered a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes. Again, this is the National School Boards Association writing a letter to the president of the United States. And so how the right wing is taking it, they're saying that Biden and Democrats are calling regular parents who have normal grievances terrorists. That's, of course, not the case. The Department of Justice is getting involved in this. The Attorney General directed the FBI and federal prosecutors to meet with federal, state, and local tribal and territorial leaders in each jurisdiction in the next 30 days to facilitate a discussion and strategies for addressing threats. That's the only thing that's the main thing we're concerned about. Threats against school administrators, board members, educators, and staff. This is about the actual incidents of threats towards these people. But don't let that stop Fox News' Steve Doocy from twisting it and everybody else. I've got a clip of Ted Cruz doing it too. Here we go.
Does the administration agree that parents upset about their kids' curriculums could be considered domestic terrorists?
Well, let me unravel this a little bit, because the National School Board Association is not a part of the U.S. government. I'd point you to them. What the Department of Justice said in a letter from the Attorney General is that, quote, threats against public servants are not only illegal, they run counter to our nation's core values. That is true. These were threats against public servants, threats against members of the school board. Regardless of the reasoning, threats and violence against public servants is illegal. That's what he was conveying from the Department of Justice.
Okay, that's Peter Doocy. My fake producer Keith is telling me, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. It's the question is the way he asked the problem. Does the president have an issue with parents having grievances about curriculum? That's ridiculous. We all, by the way, everybody has grievances about curriculum. Everybody, anybody with thoughts and an education of their own or none at all thinks, well, we should be teaching different things. We should be teaching things differently. We should be spending time here. I mean, I've got all kinds of opinions and grievances about curriculum, but this isn't that. This is actual threats to the people that work as volunteers, almost always nonpartisan, almost always on the Board of Education, teachers, and staff. Anyway, don't let that stop Ted Cruz questioning Assistant Deputy Attorney General Kristen Clark.
Do you believe parents objecting to the teaching of critical race theory have civil rights in the democratic process?
I don't follow the question, Senator.
You don't understand the question whether parents objecting to critical race theory have civil rights?
The First Amendment is a core value in our democracy, and
I didn't say free speech. I said civil rights. School board meetings are democratic. They are petitioning your local government. Do they have civil rights that the voting rights gives a damn about?
Yet they have the right to express their view, to challenge the school boards, to ask.
And is it beneficial for the Attorney General to label them as domestic terrorists and direct the FBI to target them?
The Attorney General's memo deals with threats against public servants and says that threats against public servants are not only illegal, they run counter to our nation's core values.
Do you believe parents objecting at school boards are domestic terrorists?
I don't, Senator.
Okay, so if you haven't been paying attention, then you don't know that people are going crazy at school board meetings all over the country. I've been at them myself in my own town, people screaming, people making threats, disconcerting remarks at least. And in response, the Attorney General, Department of Justice, is taking a look at addressing these threats. As far as I'm concerned, they're way behind in doing their job at keeping safe school administrators, board members, educators, and the staff at schools all across this country. I mean, the quote is, the Department of Justice takes these incidents seriously, is committed to using the authority and resources to discourage these threats, identify them when they occur, and prosecute them when appropriate. This isn't some parent coming and saying, I don't think this book should be taught. This isn't a parent bringing up a completely understandable concern, complaint, grievance at a school board meeting, which we all have every right to. But don't let that stop Ted Cruz or anybody on the right from twisting this to make it sound or seem like something that it is not. And don't expect that argument, narrative, angle, approach, strategy from the right to end anytime soon. And don't just sit around waiting for these people to stop. They're not going to stop. You've got to get involved at your local school right now. I bet, as it is in my district, there are organizations of parents and concerned community members who are working hard to make sure the school board has the support they need to teach accurate history, which wasn't that controversial for our lifetimes, and teach, yes, diversity and inclusion, because we don't understand each other well enough, and we need to, in a pluralistic society, learn about each other's cultures and work on getting along and understanding where people have been marginalized and discriminated against and what we can do to create a more equitable society with less bigotry, discrimination, and more opportunity, kindness, and love. Yeah, doesn't seem that controversial to me. It seems like a good set of human moral values. But what do I know? All right, sorry, I'm ranting. You like it a rant? Yeah, the rant is good, yes? That one's for my brother. All right, I just have to play a couple of clips for you from the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings of a Korean-American judicial nominee named Lucy Koh. Now, if she is elected, apparently she'd be the first Korean-American woman at age 53 to ever serve as a U.S. appeals court judge. She's been a U.S. district judge in California since 2010. Now, Iowa senator and skeleton of a man. The guy is like 90 and he's running again, or he's 88 and he's running again. Chuck Grassley, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. After she told her riveting life story, Chuck Grassley said this to Korean-American District Court Judge and Joe Biden's nominee for the 9th District Court, Lucy Koh.
Senator Grassley.
Judge, welcome. What you said about your Korean background reminds me a lot of what my daughter-in-law of 45 years has said. And if I learned anything from Korean people, it's a hard work ethic and how you can make a lot out of nothing. So I congratulate you and your people.
Thank you.
Now, Chuck Grassley is well intended there because he's 100 years old and he doesn't know that I guess you can be an American and also Asian. This is a woman as American as anybody else because she was born in Washington, D.C. On Twitter, there's some interesting responses. Here's one from Bruce Y. Lee. You can be born in this country, grow up in this country, and do what you can to help the country. But no matter what you do, there will be still people who always view you as clumped together in a separate and different homogenous group. Chuck Grassley tells Lucy Koh, a Korean-American judicial nominee, that his daughter-in-law is just as much of a racist idiot as he is. Is it racist? Lawyer, legal analyst, and Asian-American Shanlin Wu says Senator Chuck Grassley, quote, compliments Judge Lucy Koh, born in Washington, D.C., for accomplishments of, quote, your people. And a spokesman for Grassley said the senator's, quote, intent was to be complimentary, not to insult anyone. Yeah, that's kind of the problem, Senator, says Shanlin Wu, Asian-American lawyer. Lindy Lee writes, Chuck Grassley tells Lucy Koh, D.C.-born Korean-American, that Asians have a hard work ethic and can make a lot out of nothing. I congratulate you and your people. Asian-Americans get this all the time. Our people are Americans. 88-year-old Grassley is running for re-election. So surprised that stereotypes persist in an 88-year-old white Iowa guy. All right, well, I guess he meant well. Shouldn't have made such a big deal of it. But this is much worse. This is Republican Senator Nate Hawley also questioning Judge Koh, who she agreed with. I mean, there's this whole controversy over churches at the outbreak of COVID, that churches had to close because it was such a really, unfortunately, amazing way to spread that disease when you're cramped indoors and singing and talking, and that's a bad mix. And so she upheld what she thought was the best science. As a judge, I think that gives you the background here, what you need to know. But Nate Hawley, who is the worst of all the senators, I mean, this guy's complicit in January 6th and just dripping with awful sarcasm here. And Judge Koh is just dumbfounded by his line of questioning. It's about 2 minutes. It's worth hearing Josh Hawley just make a complete ass of himself, and the condescension with which he treats this decorated and very respectable nominee for the court is just, well, here we go.
On the other hand, at plaintiffs' gatherings, it is uncertain whether participants in these gatherings would maintain social distancing.
My order also mentioned that there are criminal penalties for not complying with the restrictions on commercial entities.
Right, so you assume that because of those, that commercial businesses will comply, but you assume religious believers would not comply. I'm just trying to understand why you disfavor religious believers in this way that seems very personal.
Oh, what an insufferable prick.
All I can say, Senator Hawley, is that I certainly have no animus toward any person of faith.
You think maybe you have an implicit bias? Let me ask you this.
No, but
in the 2020 Women's Collective Summit, you said last year that stereotypes are deeply embedded in many people. I'm quoting you now. And they may not even be aware that they're there. Do you think maybe that describes your view towards people of faith? I mean, has the Supreme Court's reversal view maybe prompted you to confront some implicit biases you may have against people of faith?
I'm a person of faith, so I would have to be having a bias against my own.
So you're telling me no? The answer is no?
I do not believe that I am biased against people of faith. I'm a person of faith. My whole family is a family of faith.
Let me read you what the Supreme Court said about your reasoning. They said, you cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work. Why did you assume the worst when people go to worship?
I did not assume the worst.
So they're wrong about that.
Oh, God, it's so hard to take. So they're wrong about that. What a con. How can anyone ever like him or be in any type of relationship with him?
No, I'm just saying that at the time, I looked at the evidence before me, and I looked at the Ninth Circuit precedent at the time, which was you're supposed to look through these 7 factors about increased risk of transmission.
I mean, it was so not controversial, but they tried to make it be about a penalty that we're penalizing churchgoers. No, it's the same everywhere. You can't be inside singing and talking and shaking hands and sipping from the same chalice and all the other crazy shit that they do at church together. That would be bad, and it would spread COVID. It wasn't penalizing people who wanted to go to church. It was protecting them. All right, it's 1:30. Let's take it down a notch right now, folks, and take a look at what else do we have for you here in the last 24. Oh, I like this conversation between Aisha Moody Mills and the great Elie Mystal on the Black News Channel. I think I'm just going to play. It's like 2 minutes. It's just Twitter cuts it off. I found it on Twitter. They only allow like 2:20 usually, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And I guess unless you're a white channel, then they let you post more. But anyway, I thought this was great. So I want to just let it rip, get a lesson. It always fires me up listening to Elie analyze anything.
How much of this great replacement talk is rooted in the fear of that reality?
Yeah, this is dangerous, but this is nothing new. Every generation of white people has their own special euphemism for when they are worried that the darkies are coming to take their stuff. This generation is using replacement theory, but it goes back. I mean, you gotta remember, this is basically Ku Klux Klan logic. And the Ku Klux Klan itself was a euphemism for the Confederacy and slavery, right? So this goes all the way back. White people are always inventing different fears to have about non-white people coming to take their stuff. It's not new. It is dangerous. And let's also remember, just because I think it's an important part here, in the full replacement theory, the people organizing this are the Jews. This is also very directly anti-Semitic. It's the Jews trying to bring in the darker races in order to, I don't know what, but like that's what they think. But here's the thing. There is actually, and please do not clip this out of context, Tucker, but there is actually a bit of truth in what they are saying, because we absolutely are trying to replace the political power of white supremacists and racists and mediocre people. Like, that is actually something that the thrust of American history is trying to do. Started in 1860, now we here. Right, like trying to get rid of this disgusting, deplorable rump of white supremacists has been an ongoing project in this country, and has quite frankly been an ongoing project around the world. Germany had to do it. South Africa had to do it. Imagine how the white South African Afrikaans Party might have talked about the emerging, the majority of black people living in South Africa. Oh, they're trying to replace us. You're damn right. You're damn right. We are trying to replace your racist behinds with actual democracy, with majoritarian rule, with meritocracy.
All right, well, that's where I cut him off. He could go on and I could keep on listening, but I'm out of time for this part of the news. That's more context, more nuance, more clips, longer form, and now I go rapid fire headlines. It's time for what we lovingly call the news dump, and another great original jingle from the always talented musician and professional voiceover artist. You can hire him for hire. Pico, take it away.
Raft of otters swimming free finally had enough. They're gnawing on children's legs on today's news dump.
Oh my God! Is that true? Did otters attack children? I'm looking that up right now. Oh no! A group of violent otters mysteriously attacking people and dogs in Alaska. It is true. Oh dear, that's terrible. River otter attacks baffle authorities in Anchorage, Alaska. When otters attack is another headline. Wow. All right, well, that gets our news dump started. Now, let's move on to a Maryland man. And another day, another angry white man does something terrible based on some crazy belief that he's been radicalized to both believe and then act upon. We used to call them Al-Qaeda, but now they are Al-Qaeda. They're right here amongst us. A Maryland man allegedly killed his brother and sister-in-law last week because his brother, a pharmacist, had administered COVID-19 vaccines. This guy was 46 years old, had told his mother he needed to confront his older brother about the government poisoning people with COVID vaccines. He repeatedly insisted that he knows something. His mother had called the police twice due to concerns about his mental stability after he talked about the FBI being after them. According to Baltimore Sun, awful story, and it's just another person who's been activated and acted upon his crazy beliefs. All right, moving on. The U.S. has disclosed the size of our nuclear stockpile for the first time since 2018. Drum roll, please. According to the report provided by the National Nuclear Security Administration, the U.S. has 3,750 warheads as of September 2020. Experts say that is enough warheads to destroy every planet in the galaxy. Just in case. I'm kidding. I just made that up. What else do I have for you? The Minnesota Supreme Court denied the killer of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, the former cop, denied his request for a public defender in his murder appeal. The country of Turkey has become the last G20 country to ratify the Paris Climate Agreement, but that's good news. A fighter jet ejected right before his multi-million-dollar fighter jet crashed in Death Valley in California. And now that pilot has a great story to tell for the rest of his life, and we're out. Let me see how much one of those jets cost. Oh, good God. Brace yourself. The Boeing F-18 Super Hornet cost $66.9 million. Can you imagine? Oh my God, that guy. I want to interview a fighter jet pilot who survived a crash and lost a plane. See how he's doing. All right, moving on. What else do I have for you? Okay, here we go. The Facebook whistleblower is set to now meet with the January 6th committee, according to a new report. And this headline is really crazy. 3 million euros worth of Nazi memorabilia were found in an alleged pedophile's home. So millions of dollars worth of Nazi memorabilia found in a guy's home. So he's a Nazi, but he's also a pedophile. And I'm really hoping we find out this is Steve Bannon's place. The city council in Seattle has unanimously voted to decriminalize psychedelics. How about that? We're going to see a lot more of that. The measure will make it so that Seattle's police will consider it among its lowest priorities to arrest anyone for the use of entheogens, drugs similar to psilocybin that are often used for spiritual purposes, according to the council's virtual meeting. Mind-altering drug, also referred to as shrooms, categorized by the federal government as a Schedule I drug, the most restrictive group. But this is progress. This is good news in Seattle. The poison that TikTok is becoming, the latest TikTok challenge, is seeing teachers apparently be assaulted. My school sent something home about this. Tell your kids not to do anything to their teachers. It's nuts out there, everybody. But let's not get too crazy. But I do want to mention that. First it was vandalizing schools. Now it's actually injuring, touching teachers, harming teachers. This is crazy. A report says that 90% of OAN, the far right-wing conspiracy network's revenue came from AT&T. Well, why would that be? Well, one theory that I saw out there, I think this was over at Talking Points Memo, Josh Marshall, it was so that AT&T, which is a cable provider, would have better negotiating power with Fox News if they had competition. How about that? I mean, I don't know how much proof there is that theory, but that certainly does make a lot of sense. Yesterday, I talked with Beyond Plastic's Judith Enck. We were talking about the danger that plastic poses and the story she told about being a former EPA administrator telling an upstate New York town that its water had plastic in it, poison in it. Well, I just saw this story from the Associated Press. Benton Harbor, Michigan is now being urged to use bottled water due to a lead risk in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Awful. Oh, I have an idea. How about we build back better without lead? Can we fund that? How many Super Hornet fighter jets would that cost? And the National Basketball League, the NBA season officially underway, but a fire alarm suspended the preseason opener for NBA champion Milwaukee Bucks. Wait, did I just get that wrong? So preseason is underway. Forgive me. Sorry, everybody. What the hell do I know about sports? Why am I talking about it? The regular season begins October 19th, so they got 2 weeks of preseason. Okay. You're welcome now that you have that information. What would you do? What would you have done without it? How would you have gone about your day? I think that kind of error means I should probably wrap up the news dump and get to the rest of the show. How about that? Okay. Coming up, Professor Nick Grossman talking about domestic terrorism and drones, national security. That's in about, I think, 45 minutes or so is how long Kelly Carlin and I talked. She, of course, is George Carlin's only child, and she and I met back in our Sirius XM days when she was hosting a show there. You may have bought her book. It's so good if you haven't. A Carlin Home Companion, Growing Up with George. Also, she made that a one-woman show. She travels the country speaking to organizations and companies and nonprofits. She's a brilliant woman who has lived a lot of different lives, done all kinds of different shows and involved in show business, but is also a scholar as well. She has her master's in Jungian depth psychology, which we talked about today. And I just love talking to her. It's always a great exploration of life and things and the big questions. And she's always been such a supportive friend to me. You should sign up to work with her to take her workshop. Women on the Verge is really fantastic. If you're not familiar with it, go to the Kelly Carlin site and go take the big leap and join her 12-month coaching program. It's just really helped so many people. And there's a lot more to do with her as well. Just check all of that out. Follow her on Twitter at Kelly_Carlin. And here now is another inspiring, healing, funny, informative, and hopefully entertaining conversation with the great Kelly Carlin. make the password be like, work harder, write more, be less whatever. I don't know.
Love yourself.
I've never used that one. I think
You might want to try that.
It's so great to see you. Hi.
It's so good to see you too. I think about you often. I miss you. We've both been busy, and I'm glad when we do this.
Yeah, well, that makes me feel great because I not only think about you, I talk about you because of the pep talk, the inspirational conversation you gave me. I'll never forget it. And I like to have those conversations as publicly as I can because I like other people to be able to hear them. And that's one of my favorite things about talking with you is that it's just a conversation, but it's one that I would want other people to be in on and have. You're certainly one of those people I like to do that with. So I'm psyched that you're letting me press record. Here we go.
You know, I like having public private conversations too.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if people didn't know you, you could say anything about your relationships with other people because they don't know who they are. But but you can't do that as well when it's public. Other than that, just make up fake names and places.
Absolutely. And imaginary friends are allowed to be here too. So, no one can check in on that.
You were a single child. Did you have an imaginary friend, brother, sister?
I don't remember that experience, but I had a lot of stuffed animals. So I had a lot of relationships going with stuffed animals. They were all part of my group. My commune was stuffed animals for sure.
Did you ever have a loss of one of them?
Yeah, I had this pillow thing that was like Humpty Dumpty. It was an egg with little pants on it and little kind of cloth legs. And that was my security blanket. And, when it was getting a little too ratty, my parents were really worried because they knew I really needed it. And so they bought me a new one and, nothing was ever really said about it. But I do remember growing out of that finally. But just the most sweetest thing ever was, I remember after my mom died, and you know how parents keep all your shit. And I got a big couple of boxes of stuff from my dad. Here's all the stuff I've been keeping for you. And in there was the ratty Humpty Dumpty. I used to call him Humpy Dumpy. Was the ratty Humpy Dumpy that my dad kept because my dad was one of the biggest fucking sentimental fools you will ever meet on planet Earth.
I love that. I lost Foxy when I was about 7. Little about handheld sized stuffed animal. I carried it with me ever. It was all ratty like Humpty Dumpty was. And I sometimes wonder where it is.
Yeah.
Where it's at. And then I found out recently that my dad took Foxy because he wanted to teach me about loss. I'm joking. I'm totally joking. I have no idea where Foxy went. I have no idea. My dad would never even imagine. No, I just did make
there's not enough accidental loss in the world. No, I'm good. It sounds like some sort of, I don't know, sociopath. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's why we don't need to teach people adversity because you're guaranteed some, if not a lot, and maybe more in the future now.
Fuck yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, totally.
What do you think about the future? Do you feel, how do you think about it? Do you think about it?
Pete, I ponder it all day long.
I want to know what you think. I want to know your biggest fears. Scare me.
I mean, for the last 20 years, I really could feel in my bones kind of this, what we're in right now, there's no real adults running everything. They're mostly adolescent, greedy, juvenile, psychologically, developmentally. And so that's worrisome. So it's a lot of tit for tat. It's a lot of transactional. It's a lot of he said, she said. It's a lot of junior high going on in the world in general. And there are grownups who know what's going on this planet and know, and there were grownups 50 years ago that knew where we were headed as an environmental, natural world situation. And so, yeah, I'm terrified for sure. Terrified about the planet, terrified about things like water. I live in California. we technically don't really have any water. Technically, we've really never had a lot of water. And we stole it, starting about, 80 years ago, something like that, to build Los Angeles. And it's like, they've known this, right? So why aren't there desalinization plants everywhere already? Like, why haven't we been doing that? That would be a really kind of a smart thing to be doing. So worried about the water here in California, thinking, a lot about, okay, where do I need to move to where there'll be water? That'll be a basic thing we need. So yeah, worried about all of that. And also, the thing I know about life is that most of the fears that I have about things don't come true, and that people are also very innovative, and there's a lot of people working on the problem right now too. That's the good news. We don't hear about those people all the time.
Right.
I was just thinking today about, just for myself personally, and then thought, well, maybe this is a public service. I want to make a list of people and organizations that are actually actively solving problems, whether it's climate, whether it's energy, whether it's how to learn how to have conversations with each other again, whether it's restorative justice, or, there's a lot of good people doing work on the planet. I thought, just for my own sanity, I need to start making a list of these people and institutions to remind myself of who they are. And then my fantasy is to have some sort of a way in which there's a annual way to bring some of these people together to meet each other, do the work, restore themselves, whatever it is, but to bring the problem solvers and the uniters and the ones who see the third way. It's not right or left. It's not right or wrong. It's not black or white. That there's always a third, at least a third way. There's probably a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth way. The people who see those other ways. I want to live in that world and not the one that I drop into on social media.
Well,
where there's only two solutions to everything.
Right. Social media is not real life. Always worth reminding us of that. Most people aren't on it, even, you could say.
I hope so.
But I love this idea. Maybe that's why we're together today, because I would do that with you, whether it's an informal list we just started on social media and everybody could add to, or we create Kelly Carlin's Ideas Festival.
Actually, I already have a name for it. It's called the Unmind Consortium. And Unmind is a little phrase I came up with, I don't know, like 15, 16 years ago. And it really holds the idea that we are multiple perspectives at any moment. Part of it came out of my interesting studies with depth psychology, integral philosophy, and my own coaching background, and understanding that there are, and Buddhism too, like the 10,000 ones that within us, right? So multiple perspectives. I love the idea of the Unmind. And I just like the word consortium because it sounds slightly mysterious.
Unmind Consortium.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go with Kelly Carlin Ideas Fest.
You're a better brander than I am, Pete.
I didn't even think about it at all. I thought of Aspen Ideas Fest and just replaced your name. That's how creative. I took an existing thing.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
So I love that idea. I think it's a great idea. I think it's really positive. I think that the people who came up with the vaccines and how the vaccines came up with, somebody should do that story, that documentary, if they haven't already, because all of those people are heroes. Yesterday, I talked to a woman that is running a nonprofit called Beyond Plastic, and they're doing a ton of really smart work to
bless them. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. So I talk to these types of people all the time for the show, and I want to highlight their work. So let's head them to send them all to the Unmind Consortium. Where will it take place? The desert, the California desert? You go there. You wear scarves and sit by fires in the desert. That's how I imagine you.
You look like nomads.
That's how I imagine
out in the
you.
desert.
You sent me this great shot of you in the desert one time, and you were like, it was such a great shot. And that's like literally in my mind's eye, that's how I think about you when I think about you. Like you're always there.
That's awesome. I'm always in the desert.
Yeah, with a scarf on, always scarved.
I love it. We just have to think of a good hashtag to get this. I'm totally up to doing this up on Twitter. Like, let's get it going. Let's get a good hashtag. We'll call it the list, or something like that. The list of hope, or I don't like hope. Hope's kind of, we'll figure it out.
I love it. So how have you been looking at, I asked you a little bit about the future, but how has your last year been? I always like to think about you, like I'll put you on a pedestal. I'm like, I wonder how Kelly's dealing with this or that, or how she would. I've been talking lately a lot about resilience, and I was complaining recently about something I was struggling with, and my friend, comedian, Ophira Eisenberg, really funny.
I do know Ophira. I met her 2 summers ago up in Chautauqua and at the National Comedy Center.
Oh, right.
Interviewed Maria Bamford for us. Yeah.
So she was like, she just kind of like let me off the hook for my problem. She's like, yeah, it could be all that, Pete, or it could be the 599th day of this pandemic. And she just started launching into that is a thing that's underlying everything else all of the time. And we've only begun to understand what it's done to us, what it's doing to us, how we're dealing with it. How has Kelly Carlin dealt with it?
Yeah, it was intense those first 4 months. And there was a lot of jigsaw puzzling in my house. And and I realized just the last few weeks that I put my 7-year-old inner self in charge of ordering from Instacart. So there was a good 10 pounds gained because I was just like, Cheetos and Oreos, fuck yeah. We're eating Cheetos and Oreos. Yeah, who knows? We've got a madman leading the country, and now we have a novel virus that they've been warning us about for years. And yeah, we're going to just hide in our houses a lot and just eat what we can and tip the Instacart people stupid amounts of money because bless their fucking hearts for going into the supermarket for me.
Do you eat those two together? I can't stop thinking about that combo.
No, not together.
Okay.
No, it definitely two different urges. When you're in the savory mode, Cheetos,
right?
Oreos.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That like it was like so many things are going bad. You're like, why would I? Like, I think it's also the reason why a lot of people gave themselves permission to drink or drink more.
Yeah, there was a lot of vodka. There was a lot of vodka drinking in our house. Not that there isn't. I mean, my husband loves a good martini, but I was helping this time with the vodka. Yeah, there was a good. I mean, it was terrifying, and then the year went on, and on top of it, right? It was an election year, so we knew the divisiveness was going to ramp up to God knows what kind of a level, and 4 years ago he even said, that if I lose ever an election, it's because people will have stolen it. So it's like, all right, well, we know that's going to happen. Yep. Gee, that's not enough anxiety already, and we've got this other stuff going on, so. It was hard. Our physiology, it was also fascinating just to watch the physiology of stress and anxiety and really be able to detach from it a bit and watch it and be like, yeah, opening another jigsaw puzzle. Gonna metaphorically put the pieces together because that's what I need to do metaphorically right now is just put the pieces together. And then, election happened, a little bumpy ride there and stuff. But, the vaccines were very exciting. And here's the other thing about it. Thank God for, which was so strange, was my work in the world really flourished last year. Yeah. There were a lot of people, because we were on such a huge pause button in life, who were like, oh, great, I have permission to take a pause in my life. Yep. I'm going to do some deep transformational work. And so it was like, I had amazing clients and people come my way and do work with me and become part of my community. So that was a very rich thing too. And also learning that we were all in that and we could park it over here. And for a couple of hours a day while I did my work, I could really do my work and really focus still. So that was a great learning thing. And now we're coming out of it. My body's, my physiology, and my anxiety is a lot better. Actually went to the Hollywood Bowl on Friday night, saw Hall & Oates. You either had to be vaccinated or have a negative COVID test and wear a mask. And there were, 20,000 people there, or 15,000, however many. It's a big place. And I felt perfectly safe. And that was good.
That's awesome. That's I like that narrative. I like to hear, there's a lot of highlights there. I too flourished. I mean, I hit rock bottom just before the pandemic, so I had just built the kind of resilience. You talked me through that, and I was ready for it to some extent. And people needed, to have the conversation and unfortunately continuing to have the conversation as well as attend the workshops that you're doing, that I'm hosting, that you're doing. And I mean, it's important. A lot of people are connecting in ways that they never did and thinking about life a lot differently than they did in terms of their priorities. And so I think those are some pretty interesting silver linings. What do you think about the anti-vax movement? You're out there in California and they've got mandates now. And this whole argument has been fascinating and terrifying to watch. How do you justify how do you understand these folks? How do you deal with them in your own life that are against getting vaccinated, their kids getting vaccinated, and even wearing masks as a sign of tyranny?
Yeah, I use a couple of different lenses to look at it. One of which is I look at it through the integral philosophy lens, which is kind of the developmental lens. People who are more traditionally oriented, those are the people like one country and one God and, are more of the traditional type of people, traditional Republican types, but they're also into civic duty and things like that. There's that kind of crowd, but there's also this real commitment to this thing called freedom and liberty, which is these are important things. These are values that I also treasure. I understand it. And yet there's this interesting thing that I the way I look at it is, and I was pondering this the other day, was, when you feel kind of trapped in your life and you feel like the world is set up to take advantage of you or set up to not give you the opportunities you want, or, like basically this late capitalism is. I mean, it's since the Reagan era, it's gotten harder and harder for people to feel like they can actually live the American dream. So there's that huge context of it. And so freedom feels narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower in these people's lives. And then you add a voice like Donald Trump with an authoritarian, really giving the red meat to those people around that issue. It just amps it up more. And so I think the freedom that they're fighting for is a legitimate value and is a legitimate urge. I just think it's misdirected. And I think that if they felt like they had more agency and autonomy in their life in general, they might not have glommed onto this issue so vehemently and so like a dog with a bone.
Yeah.
And, it's all about black or white. There's so little gray, right? And so for people who legitimately have questions and are pondering and need to know more and think about it and are just curious and intellectually wanting to understand it, more power to them. But for people who believe that this is some sort of plot for the government to control you, and yet they stop at red lights and they put their seatbelts on and they take their shoes off to get on an airplane, I think they're having a little bit of wrong thinking. They need to examine their own thinking, actually. And that's educating people how to examine their own thinking. It's an important thing that we should learn as rational people. It's called critical thinking. So there's a lack of critical thinking around it. Hey, do I trust big pharma? No. Hey, do I trust, most of what the government does in its own chunky, bad way? Yeah, I think it's, I don't think it's evil, most of it. I think a lot of what security stuff we do is evil. But generally, I feel that public health is a magnanimous thing in our country. Public health. The people who work in public health are really trying to solve it, and they have really, really good intentions, and they don't work for big pharma. And like you said, Pete, about the people who have created these vaccines and the people who invented or however the mRNA stuff.
Yeah.
It's cutting edge, amazing science. And it's legitimate, real cutting edge, amazing science that really could change the game for humans in the next 50 years as more and more viruses come around. So, I have friends who won't take the vaccine for numerous reasons. Right now, I'm keeping my social distance from them. I'm not inviting them into my house. I love them dearly. They have their reasons. I've talked to them about it. I'm okay with their reasons. So it's, once again, big gray spectrum, right? These people are people who aren't taking it. So, and I think businesses should demand their workers to take it if that's how a business wants to operate their business. I think airlines should decide on that. That this is what airlines do. This is what businesses do. So, my husband works for TV. He just got an email 3 days ago from one of the big giant companies that own all the companies that make all the content. There's like 3 of them.
Yeah.
Anyone working for us needs to be vaccinated. There's a couple people on his crew that aren't. We'll see what happens.
I think the point of freedom is it's kind of like freedom for who? Just for me, maybe, because how are we defining freedom? And then the public health is another term. You said I think most people in public health are doing it, and I'm like I completely agree with that. I mean, people get their master's degree in public health. There's all kinds of different jobs all the way up and down.
They're not fucking making a lot of money at it.
Right. And it's tough. It's really hard work, whether you're in social work or epidemiology. It's tough work. Some of them make good money. Some of them don't, depending on what we're talking about. But my point is, I only support the health of the people who really deserve it. I only think some people should get health.
This is the point.
Not Pete. The word public even is not a great word anymore.
Right. Well spoken, because it is about a sphere of who do we identify with, right? There's my family. There's the people who look like me. There's the people who live in my city, I don't know, or the people who are in my class structure, the people who vote the way I vote, the people who are in my country. Then there's my species, and so as we mature with our consciousness and as we mature psychologically, our sphere of who we feel connected to naturally gets wider and wider and wider until we really understand that we are in this together. And that means with the trees and the ocean and the air and every living thing on this planet, we are the we and are the I. The I becomes the we. And you're right. It really is this is my stuff, or this is my safety, and it's hard for people to grasp that what they do might actually help a stranger. Or hurt a stranger. I mean, that either way, depending on their actions, No,
that's so well defined, the way that you just broke it down. And I like how you got kind of meta about it with all living things. I want to share just a personal anecdote that I want you to, as you always do, I'll babble through something and then you'll make it better. But the idea of loving any living thing is really wonderful. It makes you feel good. So we all know the connections people have with animals and obviously family members, humans. But I have a really strong connection with my garden. And it brings me a lot of peace, even when I start, them seedlings under lights. My wife is over in Sicily, where she had a tough childhood. I've talked about this a lot publicly. So she had all kinds of stuff. But when she would go there, her family there was so loving. And so that became her safe space and her happy place. So she's over there visiting her aunt, and there's this stray dog, and it's on the property, and she's been taking care of it every day. And I'm like, do you realize that you're giving to that dog every time you see it what that place gave to you? That same place gave to you. And you're giving it to that dog a few moments a day. And the reason I bring that up is because not only do I think it's lovely, but because I think that is true of the world in general. If you find something or somebody to love, even if you're loving it for shorter periods of time, and even if it's not human, that is a wonderful part of your day or part of your life. And I just can't stop thinking about that little pup who's so lucky to be in Val's presence right now.
Yeah, that is the beauty of practicing loving kindness, which is a Buddhist practice. We do loving kindness meditations. And the immediate effect is that you get to be in your expanded heart with full unconditional compassion. And the way we do this practice in order to learn how to stretch that circle wider and wider, because the Bodhisattva vow is like the kind of the myth of the Bodhisattva is a fully enlightened person who could go on to the other side because they're in full enlightenment, but they stay here in order to spread compassion and love and to help all beings realize their true self.
Kind of like Stephanie Grisham, the former press secretary for Trump. She only stayed around to help everybody else because she was the only, you had to have some good people. Same thing.
Right. But total Bodhisattva move. Total Bodhisattva move. So in this loving kindness meditation, and by the way, all of you who are listening into this conversation, I mean, just go to YouTube and type in loving kindness meditation and you'll find a bunch of people who do this kind of stuff. The first thing you do is you think of someone you love, really easy to love. For some people, it's a pet. For some people, it's their child. For some people, it's their spouse, their parents, whatever it is. Unconditional love, the thing that just makes your heart go, wow, 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 immediately, right? And and let me tell you, the brain chemicals that get dumped into your body from that is all good. It's like, oh yeah, here's some oxytocin. I'm all happy, happy, happy. It's the connecting thing. Practice that. Sit with that for a few minutes. You do that. Then the next thing you do is you imagine kind of a neutral person, maybe a person you don't really know, but someone also that doesn't trigger any kind of emotion. I always think of my wonderful friends at Vaughn's who work and scan, the checkout people there. They're all lovely. We have a little connection. We look in their eyes. I don't know their last name. I don't know if they're married, but I can then send loving kindness to them. And you send it right. And so one of the things I love to do is to kind of go out and do my errands and just kind of bombard these people, these service industry people, these frontline workers with this love, right? Lots of love. Thank yous. Thanks for your service. Thanks for being here. All that kind of love. I feel great. They feel great. We're spreading love all around. Really easy part of the exercise. The next part of the exercise is to think about someone who irritates you. To just, gets under your skin a little bit, and not the big triggering one. You don't practice with that one yet. Maybe it's your brother or your sister or your neighbor or your teenage kid that's driving you crazy. It's someone who just, you've got some baggage with, and sit with them. Send them full unconditional love. Give to them and say, dear universe, or whatever the hell you call this thing, big electron, whatever language you want to use it. Send them love. Oh man, heart opens. Next time you encounter them, something shifts. Kind of interesting how that works. The advanced work is to sit with and imagine the person who really, really, really triggers you. And back in the early aughts, when I was in deep in my Buddhist practice and was going on 10-day retreats and doing silent retreats and all this kind of stuff, I would use Dick Cheney.
Oh, you can use a person. But if there were a way for him to make money off of how many people put him in that meditation, like royalties.
Yeah.
But so you can use people that you don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I can use Hannity.
It's about the emotional response for you. If they trigger you,
got it.
Send them. And so learning to sneak up and to approach and to watch the difficulty in which Dick Cheney was a 3-year-old boy at some point. He puts his pants on one leg at a time. And for the most part, I do believe, wakes up in the morning and thinks that whatever he's doing it to make the world a better place. Now,
that's hard. I'm having a hard time with the last one. I am. I mean, as soon as you said, seriously, I mean, part of it's the comedic mind, and I know this is being recorded, but as soon as you said he's the 3-year-old boy putting his pants on one at a time, I literally said in my head, and he makes sure there's a bug to crush under each foot as he puts his pants on.
But at 3, he didn't, because at 3, we're pretty much all innocent.
He did. That 3-year-old boy was already killing.
Yeah. So that's where you start. So you don't start with him, but you start with the 3-year-old him when you're ready to get there. Start with someone a little less triggering.
I'll go with Baby Cheney. I feel Baby Cheney.
Baby Cheney, like literally popped out of the vagina womb.
Right at that
I'm
moment.
going to take over this whole place.
Start there, Pete. Nonverbal, pre-verbal, completely dependent on the world around him. Start with Baby Cheney.
Baby Cheney came out of the vagina and signed a no-bid contract with the hospital. That and then he took over. Okay, he took over where all the babies are. I can't think of that unit.
Right. The point being that if we practice this, and it's not about doing it perfectly, practice it, that we are not becoming doormats for the world. We're not becoming weak-minded people and not having our own integrity and having healthy boundaries and our own standards about ethics. But we are connecting our humanity to the rest of humanity.
It's so great. I'm so glad. I knew you were going to come up with something brilliant, and I love that. It's really, I'm going to get back. I've heard about that, and I've practiced similar meditations, but never for any regularity, and it's the perfect time in my life to be doing that, especially it's not even the last person, it's just the other people who are so close to me in my life. I love it, or that I see and might not barely even know. I think that's so helpful to think about. And I wonder, as you are talking about it, I've always thought about this stuff that you're talking about. I've practiced some of it. It's always so worth discussing it and thinking about it again. It feels a little genderized to me. I feel like men have a harder time. Like Dan Harris has made a huge contribution to kind of a certain type of man with his podcast and 10% Happier, and kind of taking off some of the foo-foo stuff and having a man, guy talk about this. But why is it that, because I think you said something that made me think of this, it doesn't make us weak. Like men are so worried about being vulnerable and weak, and we're doing a better job. We are, I think. I like to think. And I wonder,
the conversation is definitely out there more, for sure. And I think men are doing a better job of it.
I think where we go wrong, though, so often, I'm generalizing, but where so many men go wrong, some of the issues we were talking about earlier, like all those guys that were insurrectionists on January 6th, and like those guys haven't gotten in touch with that. And by the way, a lot of those guys end up with all kinds of mental issues and taking their own lives. I mean, it's a really serious issue, mental health and getting in touch. Like, so a lot of us are doing better or trying to and helping the next generation, men and women, do it. But there's still a lot underlying that would seem to be stoking the fire in this country.
Yeah. This is, young boys are I'm going to use a term that's triggering and can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but, we're all victims of the capitalistic patriarchy, and those are kind of big academic terms to throw around. And,
no, but it's not controversial. If you really,
I know, but I hate using other people's buzzwords that, in some ways, but if you think about it, part of our parents' job is to make sure that we grow up to be well-socialized humans and adults. And in order to do that, they say, look, maybe I don't agree with all the rules, but, you can't do that inside the Walmart, or whatever it is, right? You just can't masturbate inside the Walmart, Pete. You just can't. So we're all socialized and we're all, asked to be compliant on some level, which is necessary for all of us to get along. We all have to know the rules to play by. But what happens in our culture with media and everything like that is, and this is multi-generational, is that boys and men were taught to be a certain way. Don't feel your feelings. You need to be tough. You need to be this, because for millennia, in some ways they did need to be tough. They did need to be toughened up. They did need to, survive in the world in a certain way. Life was really fucked up 500 years ago. It was insane how difficult life was. And so there was a lot of that. And the girls need to be this. So all of this, you need to be this and that. So men are trained to be who they are, just as women are trained to be who they are. Men in the system get a lot more things on the menu when they're a little boy and they're handed the menu of life. Hey, here's the menu of life. What would you like to order? Wow, there's a lot on this menu. Whereas women are like, is there anything else on this menu here? I only see 3 things,
Is there not a salad?
Right. That's even like 50 years ago. Like when I was a kid, like, oh, like, yeah, sure, you can have it all as long as you don't really have it all. And so one of the things that men get is that it's difficult or it's scary to feel emotions because someone in your life, whether it was a parent or a teacher or a TV show, modeled that, boys don't cry. And boys are horrible to each other. Think about bullying and think about all that stuff. So I think it's great that we're talking about mental health in the world now. I think that's the way in because it's a term that's neutral enough, but it opens up a beautiful universe and all it is about turning towards self and examining one's thoughts and feelings and getting to know what triggers them, how long they last, how do you behave because of them, and is it what you want? That's really all it is. That's all. Emotions are here to tell us what we want and what we don't want, what is dangerous and what is desirable. Thoughts are here to organize the world and our reality. And they're all something you can choose in the end.
That's all brilliant, but do you think women should be able to vote?
No.
Oh, okay.
God, no.
Because what makes everything that you like?
I mean, we're hysterical half the time.
Like, I love that. Women are so emotional. Yeah, men are too. We're so angry. That's an emotion. I don't know if you knew that.
Did you know that? Yeah, it's on the scale. There's anger. Yeah. There's happy. There's sad.
Yep.
There's a bunch of emotions. Anger's one of them. I know.
Have you watched pro sports? So,
have you watched men watching pro sports?
One thing I like would quibble with 500 years ago is harder only because I'm reading the history of the ecology of the land about like indigenous tribes and how they didn't have a lot of the stresses. Of course, you were referring to like everybody's going to die if you get a disease. People don't live very long. You die of the cold and the plague.
And if
all
you don't get rain, you're starving. Like it's fucked.
But like people weren't worried about stuff. They're not like they had less concern about all these things that we have concern with. But more importantly, what I was thinking as you were talking is yes, we've become so much more enlightened and evolved in so many ways. And gender used to matter, and it doesn't matter nearly as much now on almost anything. And yet, when I said, do you think women can vote? Because you see laws like in Texas, you do see a certain segment of our population in other countries going backwards, looking backwards, trying to create Gilead. And I, of course, minimize that. You mentioned patriarchy earlier, to religion. It's religious fundamentalists. Like women today have enough outlets to know you don't have to live under his eye. You don't have to.
Yeah. But also it's hard to get out of a abusive relationship.
That's different. Totally different.
It is an abusive relationship though.
Oh, you mean from a wider
that world?
I see. Oh, right. You got
I mean, the abuser is the structure of it all.
Right.
And, and yeah, I do agree, Pete, that, a lot of that it's, but, once again, why do people go backwards psychologically? Why do they go down the Maslow pyramid instead of up the Maslow pyramid? Fear.
Yeah.
It's about survival.
Right.
And when you make survival the issue, which it is in a global way right now, like the species, a lot of us are dealing with that. Like, as my dad said, I don't know, over 30 years ago, pack your bags, folks. We're going away. We're like a bad virus. The earth, the planet's going to shake us off like a bad set of fleas.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. One that's scarier and truer every day.
Yeah.
But when fear comes, so like when the pandemic came and, I consider myself a psychologically pretty mature, worked on my shit, pretty enlightened, got a lot of resources, got a lot of tools to deal with anxiety, all that kind of stuff. My world went, woo,
right.
Jigsaw puzzles, Cheetos and Oreos.
Sounds pretty great to me.
But so fear, the conditions of fear causes this frontal lobe here to go away. And then we get into the more survival, this is my shit. Don't take my shit away. Don't take my liberty away. Give 6-year-olds guns in school to protect themselves. I mean, the logic of that, it's like, really? That's the solution. Okay.
I've always thought logically that if someone came into my house or the bank or the school with a gun and I had a gun, I would completely fuck it up. Like this idea, this is like, there's a lot of comedy here, but this idea that you're going to save her but with your gun. When when someone comes into your house and you have all the guns and all the training, they come in and you know what? You fumbled your gun, whatever you could. It didn't have the lock on it, whatever it was. You shot and missed, and you hit the fucking heirloom lamp, and he shot you in the head. It's like it's not a movie or a TV show. These gun people,
Well, what have we been feeding ourselves on? Hero myth forever and ever, and so we watch it all day. I mean, we watch. I always think about why are there so many cop shows? For decades, I've been thinking this: cop shows and hospital shows. And because it's action oriented and it's easy to write drama. And it's basically the hero myth every week. But it's also we have this kind of fantasy that, the world is that dangerous and that, we'll be able to do the right thing in the moment and be the hero. And it's like, God, life is so much more messy. It's like if you've ever watched anyone really have a real fist fight, it's so.
Oh, and I do. If you tease me with a link, fight broke out at the Eagles game. See you later. Next 5 minutes for guaranteed. Go. It doesn't. I could be driving 80 down the highway. If you said, "Did you see this fight at the Eagles game? Did you see this bar fight?" I will risk life and limb to watch that. Wow. I won't even slow down. I'm like, oh, awesome. I'm watching that shit. Love it. I Google those fights. I am sick that way for sure.
I know. And we wonder why we're all on social media all day watching fights, being, tempted to step up to the line for the fights. And oh boy, did I make a mistake the other day. I was like, my dad was trending. And so I'm like, hey, why is my dad trending? And then, of course, someone's decided that my dad would have been anti-vax for sure because of his independent critical thinking. And I'm like, yeah, independent critical thinking would have gotten him to the result of, I'm a heart patient. I believe in science. I do everything my doctor tells me to do. I've taken every vaccine I've ever needed in my life. Yeah, sure, I swam. This is their whole thing. Well, he swam in the Hudson River and nobody in his neighborhood got polio. Yeah, you want to know what else? My dad took the polio vaccine when he was a kid. Shocking. So anyway,
the answer, you can't. I'm sure you think it's inappropriate for you to speak for your father now that he's not here. I would be tempted to. I'd get right on his Twitter account and be like, listen, here's what I think. But in this case, you don't actually have to know. He was vaccinated. He took vaccines.
The person who took vaccines. He did a comedy routine about, no, I'm not I do not pull the plug on me. Put more plugs into me. Any hole you can find, put a plug.
That's good. Really good.
This is a man who wanted to stay alive. If there is a novel virus going around and he's, he would have been 84 this year, a man with severe heart disease who, he obviously, it was a miracle he lived till 71, by the way. But it was like, come on, people, come on. So anyway, I waded out into that. And then immediately, and I don't get a lot of pushback. I'm pretty grateful.
When you say you waited out, did you comment?
I did. Oh, I did. I hashtagged MAGA.
Why? Were you having too good of a day?
I was. I was thinking, you know what? It's too quiet.
Why don't you just punch
here.
yourself in the face?
But it's fine because they're all my dad's fans. And so they fight amongst themselves.
Oh, really? Yeah.
How dare you say that George Carlin's daughter wouldn't know what her father would do? How dare you say that he's not a critical? I mean, and so I just let them fight. And then after a day of that, I'm like, why did I do that? And then I mute the conversation and then I change who can reply. And then I move on. And they're still over there fighting about it. It's been 2 days. Everyone's fighting about it over there.
Have you gotten any major scandals or anything?
No, I don't. I don't think people, I don't know. I don't know if I'm just not controversial enough. I'm generally a person who avoids that kind of thing. I mean, the way I talk about things, I'm the person who holds the tension of the opposites. I'm willing to look at both sides, hold it,
try to understand it intellectually, try to understand it in my heart. And I'm the last person who wants to get into a knockdown, drag out fight about anything. The pleasure I have about being a Carlin, and this goes beyond my father, but, you know, I think about all of my ancestors in that line, is that we were these kind of people who think about things and like to find the nuanced, unexplored way of looking at things. And I really believe that part of that is genetic, because my dad's mother had that in a lot of ways. And I know my dad's dad was a motivational speaker. Actually, he was an inspirational speaker, among other things he did. And so I believe, I look at my uncle. My uncle does it all day long. He's still alive. He just turned 90 last Friday. Always loves to find the interesting angle that no one else is thinking about. That's the pleasure. And I think because I'm always looking for that, I don't get roped into the slugfest of cancel culture and all that crap.
The tension of the opposites, is that what you said?
Yes, it's a Jungian term, one who holds the tension of the opposites, because we see things as light and shadow, ego and the unconscious. And that's kind of the tension that Jung and Freud, the reason they're called depth psychologists is because they discovered the unconscious. They were able to talk about the human unconscious and the personal unconscious. And then Jung added the collective unconscious, where we understand things through Joseph Campbell, hero myths and the patterns of that and things like that. And so the truly individuated person, or the what we would say the authentic adult perspective, is one that can hold both sides and understand that when you hold both sides, a third thing is created from it. That naturally it's kind of an alchemical thing that happens, that when you are willing to really hold both sides and see what they are, that something else comes out of it. And that's the advancement of consciousness and thinking in general, is how it happens.
I just want to clear this up and then I'll wrap it up. But just when you talk about both sides, it's easy to think, well, do I have to both sides rape, abortion in cases of rape and incest?
It's not about behavior. It's not about both-siding behavior. It's about understanding that inside of all of us, there is the rapist and the rape victim.
And so for another example, it would be like an argument with a stranger, a coworker, your boss, your spouse.
So inside of all of us, there's equally a person who is dedicated to complete and total freedom with no restrictions on your being, and someone who is completely willing to abide. I'm talking about the most poles of these things.
Right.
Someone who's completely willing to abide by every rule possible and has zero autonomy. So there's full autonomy with no restrictions and unwilling to live with consequences. And then there's someone who has zero autonomy and only lives in restrictions and is only driven by consequences.
Right.
Two most extreme poles. Most of us live somewhere in the middle. But if you acknowledge that you have both of these inside of you, not the political position they take, not the behavior, but the thing that grows those urges and perspectives, we all have those inside of us. When you can start to sit with your own shadow around this stuff, man, the world starts to look different.
Well, that is an amazing place, as much as I hate to ever end a conversation with Kelly Carlin. To wrap it up, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today, and I can't wait to share this. I think about this with certain people, but certainly it was in my mind. I was like, I can't wait for people to hear these things being said. Thank you very much, Cal. Great to see you.
Oh, Pete, so good to see you.
There she goes, Kelly Carlin, everybody. Go follow her on Twitter and let her know you heard her on the show at Kelly_Carlin, her website, thekellycarlinsite.com, and sign up for her workshops and learn from her. So thankful, so grateful to have her in my life and have her on the show as well. All right, now time for another first-timer here on Stand Up. He is a international relations professor at University of Illinois. He's also the senior editor of ARC, Digital, which is a really great newsletter. You should go to that. Subscribe arcdigital.media. And he's also the author of Drones and Terrorism. We talked about the drone attack. We talked about domestic terrorism, his recent article about Tucker Carlson aiding and abetting domestic terrorists. Is just another guy who studied and spent most of his career looking at foreign jihadists and terrorism from foreign groups, and he has now realized that the enemy is here and using similar tactics to radicalize our own people. So it's pretty scary out there, but a really important conversation with an excellent expert on national security. He is on Twitter at ngrossman81. Would love for you to give him a follow and let him know that you liked our conversation, which starts right now with Professor Nick Grossman. I'm psyched to talk to you. I've just discovered your work. I think it's so relevant, so important. But I wanted to start just and go back a few weeks ago and ask you, probably, you're probably one of the most important people to ask any question about drones, because you're an expert and you wrote a book about it. And just your reaction to what happened in Afghanistan, the Biden administration ordering a drone attack that obviously I think we can agree was an accident, but still the repercussions of killing an innocent family. Talk to me just about how kind of your work and your book relates to certainly that drone attack.
So there were two on the way out of Afghanistan. There was one that the U.S. shot. Both of these came after the Kabul airport terrorist attack. And there was one that the U.S. shot that was pretty distant from Kabul that they claimed hit and what they called an ISIS planner, which is the sort of ambiguous term that says they're confident they got an ISIS member, but it wasn't actually the people who were behind this. And then there was the second one, the last one that got so much of the press, that was a attack on what ended up being a totally civilian target. And the obvious one here is it's really tragic that those people didn't do anything to deserve it and weren't threatening other people. And it's also unfortunately just sort of part of the downside of drone warfare, of one of the things that you have to accept, either that sometimes there are royal screw-ups like this, and it looks almost certainly like it was a intelligence screw-up, in that the type of logic that the people watching these things go through are trying to judge behavior and determine, so there was already a suicide bombing at the airport. Is somebody else going to come? We have a chatter. Maybe someone else is attempting something. And then people watching this sometimes put the worst spin on what they're seeing and have almost sort of a confirmation bias of, hey, this guy is loading stuff into his car. Is it explosives? Is it gasoline? Is he going to be building a car bomb? And then you start putting everything through that frame. And this has happened a few other times in the past also. And when I say, though, to some extent of accept it, is because and don't accept the moral aspect of it, always try to do this better, but that the alternative is to either do nothing or try to do something with ground forces. And it is extremely difficult for a political leader to endure something like that Kabul airport terrorist attack and not be on high alert and not say, tell security services, okay, look out for another and be ready to do something. And from the people who are thinking, watching the monitor, they're thinking, oh no, if I mess this up, that means that tons of people are going to die, that much more people are going to blow up, and that's going to be on me. I could have done something at the time and I didn't. And so it's that tension between the two. And it's something that is difficult and often ends up being a terrible decision either way.
Is there any way to evaluate and have a discussion about the drone program as implemented by the United States military over the past how many years?
Anyway, too, sure. I mean, which part of it?
The effectiveness. I'm a little is for a kind of an anti-war Chomsky lefty. I have some sympathy for the drones. I think kind of based on what you already said, which is, some of the alternatives are, pretty horrible in occupation, military intervention, and so on. And, if you look at the targets, you could maybe say it took out this many bad guys, but then you have to talk about the constitutionality of it, which I think is a really important discussion if it's an American citizen like Alaki. And then you have to talk about how many misses where innocent people died. And most importantly to me is not, is the moral question, but the actual consequences, which is if you kill innocent people, you create more terrorists, which is maybe I shouldn't be connecting those dots, but I've heard that from a lot of national security experts. So you're sometimes creating more terrorists than you're killing. So from any of those angles or any other, is it effective, I guess?
So, I mean, first I would just say about talking about it. Absolutely. Of course, people should talk about it. The research on it shows both that drone strikes tend to kill fewer civilians than missiles fired from other targets. Or from other platforms. Think of, from a ship or from a manned aircraft. And that one makes sense also because drones don't need to sleep or eat or pee. They don't worry about somebody shooting back at them. So they don't take a quick shot and try to get away. They can hover for a while and wait, sometimes say 24 hours and wait until somebody is away. And that's why the tragedy in the last last drone attack in Afghanistan was that people misunderstood what the target was, not necessarily that they were thinking that they were shooting at civilians. On the create terrorists, create more than they create more than they eliminate. There is something to that. But what most of the data that we can find, what it shows is that to the extent it does that, the new terrorists are not as skilled as the old ones. So things like bomb making, for example, to put together a suicide vest using plastic explosives, that is not easy. There are not many people who can do that. And if a drone strike kills somebody who does that, and then in turn, say, 2 recruits join, those recruits are less valuable to a terrorist group than that bomb maker. And also with their fear of being attacked by drones, they're moving around a lot more. They are less likely to be in a place where they can plan, where they can kind of work things out. They're warier of new recruits because maybe those recruits are spies. So it ends up being something where I stress to people to try to think of it, if you want to judge the morality of drone strikes, think of it against various alternatives. And that includes things like missile strikes from piloted aircraft, which tend to kill more civilians, but also, to be clear, doing nothing, or say just focusing on defense or focusing on anti-terrorism. And so something like right after a terrorist attack in Kabul and the U.S. is trying to withdraw, that's a really chaotic environment. It's hard to say do nothing in that case. With somebody like you brought up, Awlaki, that one also rubs me the wrong way because he's an American citizen. He has constitutional rights. The president, that was Obama at the time, just declared that he doesn't by a fiat. There wasn't any judicial process. I would have at least liked to see him tried in absentia and had a judge say like, okay, right, we find you guilty of whatever. But he was one where the U.S. determined that it would be too dangerous to try to arrest him, that he was in a really volatile environment. That probably would have led to more deaths than it would otherwise. And that he, by being connected to so many different terrorist attacks, was also too dangerous to just kind of let him continue to operate and try to maybe figure out what he is doing in the future. But it's one where I do not shed a tear for this guy at all. I have no doubt that he was who everybody is accusing him of being. And at the same time, I'm not at all comfortable with the president being able to say that American citizen is officially a bad guy. They no longer have constitutional rights.
Yeah, there's a lot of legal and moral issues that most of us don't understand and get to, to take into consideration how we decide to have an opinion and then tweet about it. So I really appreciate your thoughtful take on it. And there's a lot more to talk about with that. I just want to add how upsetting it was to hear the news about the drone attack where the innocent guy and his kids were killed, and how I do believe there should be consequences for that. And so I want to be, before I give credit to the Biden administration on another thing, I do want to be critical of the Biden administration for this thing, because that's how we used to have discussions and they were thoughtful and real. But what should those consequences, should there be consequences, Professor?
I don't know. I find that a tough one. And the reason why is because this was not the only one. Just want a couple of other examples of this, that there are 2 known instances in which the U.S. bombed the wedding processional, where it was thinking like, oh, here are a bunch of people in this country where we're fighting. We know where, say, Al-Qaeda is operating, and they're all getting in a convoy. And doesn't that look shady? And then it turned out to be totally innocent and a wedding. And that one especially weighs on me.
But to be fair,
and we're totally innocent.
Those were previous administrations. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. So not Biden, correct. The drone program shows remarkable continuity across administrations. That where Obama, Trump, Biden, that with Bush it was new and kind of it settled in, and we frankly got better at it under Obama. But Obama, Trump, Biden is pretty similar. Some differences if you want to get into it. Trump relaxed rules of engagement so to allow more civilian casualties, to say basically be less careful about it. But it is pretty similar across them. Yeah. The problem, say, with punishing when it comes to military action of anything where it is a deliberate action to harm civilians, I would say readily punish. These were, for example, some of the war criminals that Trump ended up pardoning did things like shoot at civilians from a few hundred meters away where the civilians didn't have any weapons and where everybody else in their unit said, like, we were not under threat. Yeah. This guy was just nuts. And that sort of thing, that is a deliberate action to harm innocent people. That one I'd say absolutely punish. Court-martial, put him on trial. When it comes to something that is clearly a mistake, that's where I get hesitant about saying to punish people, because there was a immense amount of pressure to try to protect the airport and protect the evacuation. And one of the things about warfare is mistakes happen. So where the line between a mistake that should not have been done, but perhaps was not really anybody's fault, versus a mistake that somebody did a truly immoral action that they should have known not to do. So I get hesitant about punishing people, in part also because there's a disincentive. No, we really do want people to be careful about this, of course. And we also don't want them to be so hesitant that if they really think the information is good, that this is a car bomb on the way to kill a bunch of people, that they think, oh, no, I'm going to get in trouble if I shoot at it, but I won't personally get in trouble if it ends up blowing up a bunch of innocents. And so therefore, by my personal incentives, I'm not going to take the risk. And so we don't want that one either. So it ends up being a really tough needle to thread. I don't think there's a really good answer to it.
How dare you not give me a succinct, great answer to make me feel one way or another so I can go about my day?
Yeah, with this stuff, I'm not going to be able to give you something along those lines for most of them. Sorry.
That's why I really like the way that you're writing about this at Arc Digital, which is a media Substack that everybody should subscribe to. You're not the only contributor; you're an editor as well, and it's really good. And you've got several great pieces that I wanted to discuss. If we got time for at least a couple here, but let's just stay in Afghanistan, because you have an interesting piece, and I think where do we need more nuance in a conversation about a situation than we do in the withdrawal of Afghanistan, which is the end of a 20-year thing, and which is why we have to have thoughtful discussions about it. The title of this piece you wrote is "Every Option in Afghanistan Was Bad: How It's Ending, What Happens Next, and What the U.S. Should Do." Folks should go subscribe to arcdigital.media so you can read the whole thing. But what can you tell me here now about that piece? Your take.
So thank you for the kind words about ARC. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
That was my big takeaway for everybody that I hope would think. It was right in the title, but that every option was bad. And what I mean with that was the thing that I think a lot of Americans are not comfortable with, but that the idea of neither winning nor losing, and where one option was potentially, people would say like, oh, why don't we oh, you really think we're going to stay there indefinitely? And my response is, why not? Maybe. So a lot of American conception of war is in part driven by pop culture, but, World War II is the good war. And that is, they started it and they're clearly bad. And we rally together and we go achieve a victory and we get a surrender, and then we end and then we have a parade. And something like Vietnam, that's the bad war, where, it goes on for a while and we don't really know what we're doing and we're not working with the local population. They don't like it. And there's, drafts that Americans are being forced to fight there. And so we don't want that. And both of those were so much bigger than what the U.S. was doing in Afghanistan by the end. So the Iraq war peaked at about 160,000 U.S. troops. The Afghan war was under Obama at about 110. The Vietnam was about 500,000 U.S. forces there. In Afghanistan, it was by the very end about 2,500. And then for the last 5 years, about 10,000, give or take. So then in terms of other options, Biden comes in, and a lot is locked in by the February 2020 deal that Trump cut with the Taliban. So he agreed for the U.S. to withdraw, and that was the reason why we had such low casualties between the U.S. and the Taliban. So this was why if you saw the generals testifying in front of Congress of saying, I would have recommended keeping 2,500 troops, maybe that could have sustained things. And that is just wrong. It's just simply incorrect that the status quo was one in which the Taliban had gotten 5,000 people out of prison, in which they were having a bunch of gains, in which the United States was largely avoiding any sort of combat with them. And if the U.S. broke that deal, then all bets were off. And so for the U.S. even to get back to something like the status quo would have required an escalation. So Biden's options were either escalate or withdraw, that there was no kind of just stay there alternative. Trump's options, if he had kept it going, was to, or then perhaps bequeath to Biden, but was to sort of stay indefinitely. And that also has, of course, big downsides. And people aren't comfortable with the idea of thinking this as a problem that we manage rather than something that we either win or lose. But I would at least recommend that people try to get more comfortable with the idea that there are some problems in the world that you can't fix, but you can prevent from getting a lot worse. And so I became wary of things like, will we see Afghanistan become a base for terrorism again? Will we see, and we're already seeing this, things like a lot of, especially say women and girls, LGBT people, where their lives got a lot worse, especially in Kabul and other cities over the last week. So there are downsides to just about everything. Withdraw, stay, escalate. There was no good choice. It was going to be tragic in some way or another either way.
There again, do you think that someone should be responsible for not seeing what was going to happen, whether it be intelligence or military experts on the ground, that they should have known what was going to happen with the leadership of the country, with the military of the country, with the Taliban's ambition? Do you think there should, was that such a mess that there should be consequences there?
That's where I think the big screw up was. So there's a lot of, accusations against Biden about how things went poorly. And to some extent, there's no smooth way to lose a war, that there's, no smooth way to evacuate basically under fire. And on the other hand, there's also a pretty big intelligence failure in the sense that the Taliban took over much more quickly than most people expected. Certainly the way that the U.S. government was operating and the way that Biden and Milley and others were talking to the public. As recently as I think it was May or June, they were still saying stuff about, of course the Afghan government can hold out and, the military, and they'll be okay. But this was something where even it was pretty quick in hindsight, I thought was kind of, just dumb in that why did we think they were going to fight hard? They had fought quite well. I don't appreciate the Biden saying like none of them wanted to, because a lot of the Afghan military took something like 60, 70,000 casualties over the course of the war. There were Afghan special forces who fought quite hard and are now trying to hide as they're being hunted down by the Taliban trying to consolidate power. But you had first Trump cutting a deal with the Taliban and cutting out the Afghan government, which is as big a vote of no confidence as you could possibly have. And the Afghan military saw that. You're going to cut a deal with our enemies and you're going to release a bunch of them from prison and you're not even going to bring us in on the deal. So that was one. And then the U.S. says we're withdrawing. We're definitely going to leave. And part of the way that the Afghans fought was they depended on U.S. intelligence and sometimes air support, or at the very least, things like equipment maintenance.
Right.
And so if we're not maintaining the equipment, so a lot of the fancy stuff we gave them doesn't work. And we had their back for 20 years, and now all of a sudden we don't. And the United States has been saying to the world, oh, they're going to collapse, but in like 18 months. So if you're an Afghan soldier, why would you risk your life for that? Why wouldn't you instead say things like, okay, the Taliban's definitely winning. Why don't I try to make the best of it? Either hide, or maybe I can surrender, or maybe, any other variation on that. So they should have known, or at least should have taken more seriously the possibility that the Afghan government was going to collapse quickly. And that would have set up more aspects of the withdrawal, perhaps in advance. But they were also afraid of, if they started withdrawing, that we would just have the same process, but like a month earlier. if they made it really overt, because then it would be, oh, the Americans are out sooner. Right. Well, then the government's collapsing sooner, and it would have been its own process. So I think it probably, no matter, it was going to go poorly, but maybe it went less well than it should have.
All that being said, and that's a really, really thoughtful take, and everybody should read the piece at arcdigital.media. But my hot take here, I'm going to throw out my hot take, and then you can shit all over it. But because it's not nuanced, really, but more than anything else, like all these Republicans, especially accusing Joe Biden and the president, the administration, not listening to the generals, and this question of did he listen to the generals? My hot take is, thank goodness this president finally stopped listening to the generals. The generals have been wrong for 20 years and 20 years before that in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, for a lot of different reasons that we could talk about. But they were wrong for several reasons. And I'm glad that Joe Biden didn't listen to the military. And I'm glad that we have civilian leadership as a result. So take that apart and embarrass me if you want.
So this might surprise you, but I'm not going to take that apart much. I think that that's a pretty solid take to some extent. I think that's also probably Biden's take, in that I got the sense that Biden saw his big task here was to get withdrawal against the will of the national security establishment. That kind of his big adversary here at this point, given that he had decided on withdrawing, was not actually something specifically in Afghanistan, but was the generals and the rest of, the blob of the foreign policy establishment in the United States. And the reason why, first with Biden, that he had advised Obama in 2009 against a big surge in Afghanistan. Obama campaigned on Iraq was the bad war, Afghanistan was the good one, we need to win in Afghanistan. And he did this big surge. And Biden had told him, look, I've been around this town a lot. I know what it looks like when the generals are kind of rolling a new president. You shouldn't do this. That's what's happening here. So Biden has seemingly wanted to get out for a long time. And Trump came into office saying we need to get out of Afghanistan. And he ended up escalating it first and then drew down, but didn't actually leave. Maybe if he got reelected, maybe he would have left. But also then we would have had other problems.
Yeah.
It is good for a country to have people who will say, yeah, I can do it, or just give me more resources and we'll win. And it's also good for a country to have people who will be able to say to them, thank you for your advice, but no. So while I personally would have aimed for, at least pre-2020 deal, I would have aimed for a kind of indefinite holding pattern, that the costs of withdrawing, I thought, were greater. The risks of withdrawing were greater than the cost of staying, both security and humanitarian. But, that's a tough call, and I don't really know. And given the situation that the United States was in, if there were generals like, say, Milley was testifying, saying we can hold the place with 2,500, that's just not good advice. Yeah. So it was better that he said, no, I'm the president and we have civilian control of the military, and that I am deciding, for a variety of other reasons, that we're out. We're withdrawing.
And we know what we can hold, because the strategy for years was clear, hold, and build. And you could clear, hold, and build a certain area with a certain amount of troops, but you couldn't sustain it. You couldn't, for several reasons. And so the idea that you are going to, sustain it with 2,500 troops, maybe a neighborhood for a while. That's my take. But let me get to the final question. The piece of yours at Arc Digital that put you on the map for me was one I thought was super important and thoughtful. And I know you didn't write it lightly. I know you didn't. You're a very serious guy. But it's titled "Tucker Carlson is Aiding Anti-American Terrorists." Fox News' most popular show pushes an ideology that's motivated by deadly attacks. And just to continue reading here, you write, "We have a white nationalist terrorism problem, and Tucker Carlson is helping the terrorists." That's a serious accusation, and I don't make it lightly. You've been studying this and teaching about terrorism for 15 years, primarily focused on jihadists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. How do you make this leap? This is a really important piece that everybody should read, and not easy for you to write, I know.
Right. It wasn't. It's something where I'm a pet peeve of mine for pretty much my whole career is people using the word terrorism too lightly, of terrorism almost meaning bad guy or thing I don't like, or, things that are not related to actual terrorism at all. And the terrorist attacks that I'm talking about, I mean a very clear example of politically motivated mass murder against non-combatants. And so examples of this, of the two largest terrorist attacks in the United States in the last 5 years, deadliest terrorist attacks in the U.S. in the last 5 years, were the El Paso shooting, which killed 23, was targeting Latinos, was the biggest anti-Latino terrorist attack in U.S. history, and the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, which killed 13, and which was the largest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. And those are the largest terrorist attacks in the last 5 years. And both of them are by white nationalists, different versions of it, but who believed in this conspiracy theory that's known as the Great Replacement. And that is something that Tucker Carlson has been pushing increasingly openly and finally used directly by name. And this sounds, I mean, it sounds insane to be saying this, but what the facts say is this is pretty similar to if somebody, say, after 9/11 was on TV all the time arguing that Al-Qaeda was right, that, I don't mean saying, yay, Al-Qaeda, I like them, because it's not like Tucker says these terrorists were good. He doesn't tell people go out and be violent. He just makes the same argument that they made, the argument that appears in their manifestos, which also appears in the Christchurch shooter from New Zealand. And it also appears in the attack in Norway by, it was a terrorist named Anders Breivik, that was in 2011, in which he killed over 70, including a lot of kids. And all of them are driven by the same idea that non-white, non-Christian immigration is not something that is driven by, push-pull forces of, the poor conditions in somebody's home country and the appeal of places like the US or Europe. So instead of say, oh, people are fleeing Guatemala because there's a lot of gang violence and a poor economy, and people are coming then to America because America is a great place to live, that, at least comparatively, it's a great place to live. But no, it is this secret kind of giant conspiracy theory by a bunch of elites, which sometimes means Jews and sometimes doesn't. So, different versions.
Yeah.
And the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, for example, said, and he was open about this, that he attacked that synagogue because there is a Jewish charity that helps refugees, and they were helping some Syrian refugees get settled, and that this was something that he referred to as our people, meaning white people, getting slaughtered, despite the fact that there was no violence whatsoever resulting from any of this. And that is the argument that Tucker makes, and in increasing volumes, pretty much, or just about every night, at least as a frequent thing every week, about where immigration is this conspiracy, that it's driven by power, that it's doing things like diluting, is a word he likes to use, and that the conspiracy theory likes to use, deliberately diluting the white vote. And it doesn't really connect to any, say, direct semblance of reality, besides maybe vague things about predictions like, oh, as the country gets less white, it'll help Democrats win more elections, perhaps, which doesn't even really match the facts, given that, for example, in the last election, compared to 2016, Trump did worse with white people and better with both Black and Latino voters. Not a lot better, but better. So,
and it also sorry, but it just one important point that I would love to insert. It also absolves the Republican Party or conservative movement of trying to win over new voters that come from other countries. Like, they're not automatically going to be Democrats. And if they are, what's the problem? What are you not offering them? I would argue.
Sure, that there's no reason why Republicans have to appeal to a aging, kind of declining white constituency.
Right.
It wasn't long ago where the ideas that were coming out of at least elite Republicans were that conservatism has a bunch of good ideas and applies to a lot of people, that Bush called this compassionate conservatism. Reagan did a amnesty for illegal immigrants, and then Reagan and George H.W. Bush in debates kind of argued about who was more pro-immigrant for the reasons of American exceptionalism, that, nation of immigrants, we are a shining city on the hill. Of course, everybody wants to be an American. Who wouldn't want to be an American? And that used to be a prominent attitude in the Republican Party. And it shifted, I think, a lot of with Obama and the Tea Party were the start of it, and then really shifted with Trump, but now has reached a point of saying, not appeal to voters based on things like policy, or for that matter, a lot of Central and South Americans are Christian and religious and socially conservative, not appealing to them on that part, but just going really hard into white identity politics that gets into, at its most toxic version, things that motivate terrorist attacks.
And I think McVeigh subscribed to some replacement theory as well. Timothy McVeigh.
Sort of. McVeigh was really into, so the Oklahoma City bomber, he was a fan of a white supremacist fantasy novel that's called The Turner Diaries, which basically fantasizes about a race war in the future in the United States. I wouldn't really call him a replacement theorist. A lot of his issue was more that used to be more common in right-wing, far-right politics of anti-government, that was angry over Ruby Ridge, over Waco, Texas, of other kind of overreach of the federal government that ended up with some people dead. So I wouldn't really call him a replacement theorist. Immigration wasn't his big thing. He claimed that the government was attacking or oppressing free Americans, by which he did mostly mean people like him. But some of the seeds are there. But really, this as a international movement, as a terrorist threat that, like with jihad, it's not either or. It's from a national security perspective. These are now both above the threshold. They're both threatening. But it is the one that Great Replacement Theory is kind of a transnational nationalism, which is weird, almost paradoxical. But it's seeing the whole thing as defending Christendom or defending that civilization, where really they mean white civilization, and attacking in New Zealand or Norway or Texas or Pittsburgh, people that are that are involved with immigration, that where it was the ruling party in Norway that did it. So if the people are building on and honoring these other terrorists to do it, they don't have an organization like ISIS or Al Qaeda that is giving them orders. They are taking inspiration from each other and doing it all themselves. It's almost like a warped version of the activist mantra: think globally, but act I screwed that up. Think globally, but act locally.
Yeah.
Where they are thinking globally about big population movements in the age of globalization. And then they find themselves in a country with now a 2% Muslim population and claim that this is taking over and destroying Christianity and destroying Europe and destroying culture and destroying America. And then the most extreme ones act on it violently. But that doesn't really get going until the 21st century. When McVeigh was 93.
You do have a what can be done in this piece. And so maybe we end on that, about the Tucker Carlsons of the world who are inspired by and arguably inspire people like the murderer in Norway and Christchurch. So what can be done?
Unfortunately, I don't think all that much. That I ended on, I guess, sort of a pessimistic note about this. And one reason, just at the basic level, is the First Amendment, free speech, that free press, the idea of the government trying to get in this case, prominent Fox News host off the air, the damage that does to free speech and to the freedom of the press, I think would just be way over the line. That cure worse than the disease of, if you don't believe me on that, imagine instead of a president you like, maybe you like Joe Biden, instead of imagining Biden doing that, imagine Trump gets reelected, and then there's a precedent of the government can shut down TV shows they don't like. So that's a really dark path that I wouldn't want to walk on. There are ways to try to pressure, say Fox or anybody else who hosts this, that Bill O'Reilly, after his sexual harassment suit, then a lot of advertisers pulled away, and then Fox said, okay, our business decision is get this guy off the air because he's not making us money anymore. And the problem is various activists like Sleeping Giants, for example, have tried to do that with Tucker, and they've gotten most of the companies that might be affected by that to already pull ads. And whether Fox gets enough money from things like subscriptions and the advertisers, from MyPillow or whoever else is advertising on there, or if they're just ideologically committed to it, that they don't care if they lose money on it, I don't know. But I don't think that's really going to work either. And what that leaves us with is basically arguing against it, calling it out, which is what I was trying to do, of recognizing that the vast majority of Tucker Carlson's viewers are not white nationalists, are not conspiracy theorists, are not terrorists or pro-terrorists. That the danger is more that, say, if he's got I don't know, just to ballpark it, if he has about 4 million viewers, and that doesn't even count all the, say, internet clips, but if he has 4 million regular viewers, if we assume that 99.9% of that would never be violence, would never do anything else like that, then we're still left with 4,000 potential terrorists. And what Tucker is effectively doing is making it that more of that, what you might think of as basically normie Republican audience, will think maybe if some, those terrorist attacks, maybe they weren't so wrong, or, okay, murder isn't right, but, I do kind of understand where they're coming from because our country is, under the conspiracy theory, country is under attack, meaning allowing some people to immigrate here. And will be therefore also a more receptive environment to potential terrorists, where they might think, hey, if I do this, I'm going to get some support from a lot of these prominent TV shows or these prominent figures. So then I'll become famous, I'll get defended. And it is that distinction between the people who are already into the conspiracy theory and the people who are mostly just watching the news, where it's sort of out of habit or because they've always voted Republican, they've always voted Fox, something like that. To try to call it out and explain as best as possible, which is, I guess, what I'm trying to do, of explain to as many people of where the difference is and why this is over the line in the sense of, just being blatant about it, of helping terrorists, we're stoking that. Well, and then finally, if he or anybody he supports run for office, win elections. Other than that, I wish I had a better answer, but...
No, I appreciate that answer because I just think it's really super important. And we're seeing, unfortunately, more people in your world of experts on terrorism, foreign policy, counterterrorism, all of that, looking to what's happening here in America. And unfortunately, being experts on American terrorists as well, domestic terrorists. And it's such a terrible trend, but it's so great that we do have people like you taking this seriously and calling it for what I, from a media perspective, have seen for forever, because I pay very close attention to news, and you see these things happening all the time, but they're not as widely reported, and they're not reported as, called terrorism. So I think the fact that you're talking about this and the fact that you wrote that was a really big deal. And I think it's really great to have you on the show, is all I want to say here to wrap it up. Would look forward to talk to you again and reading you. And Nicholas Grossman, Professor Grossman, thank you so much for talking to me today. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me, for joining me, for being on the show. He's gone. I just said that after we did the conversation. All right, that's Nick Grossman at University of Illinois, International Relations, professor, author of Drones and Terrorism, on Twitter at ngrossman81. Thanks again to Kelly Carlin. That was a great conversation. I felt really good about that. Hopefully you did too. I always love to hear what you love to hear. So email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and join us tonight if you're a stand-up community member. We have the hangout at 8 p.m. East. Look forward to seeing you tonight at 8 p.m. East. The link is in the email that you get every day, along with a taste of vitamin N, a photo of nature. No humans allowed in those photos. Send those over to me as well. I'm getting kind of low on vitamin N picks. So, and if I haven't used yours, remind me, because if it's great, I want to use it, but sometimes I lose them. I forget them, where they are. Hashtag vitamin N. Put that in the subject heading and get outside and get that vitamin N. All right, you hear John Carroll. He is a great member of our community. Hopefully we'll see him tonight. He is going to sing us out. Singer-songwriter, Grammy Award winner, John Carroll at John Carroll 88. And also, of course, as always, thanks to Pete Coe. Love you guys. See you tonight. You're never alone if you're a stand-up community member. I forget to say that, but join us anytime on the Discord platform as well. Okay, now I'll shut up. Take it away, John.
They knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand